What's up, Barefoot Nation? This week we are talking about hardy orchids. Anyways, there are tons of types of hardy orchids. I guess not tons, but tons of cultivars. And I am going to be focusing on the Bletillas, otherwise known as Chinese ground orchids. Without further ado, let's go! Hardy orchids. What is the trick to keeping them happy? Well, some people say that they're easy to grow, and I've also kind of had that experience too. But this right here is a Bletilla striata, and the cultivar here is elbow striata. The reason it gets its name is because of this teeny tiny little white margin on the leaves. It is a beautiful bloom when they're in flower. This guy was planted out from a 3-gallon pot last year, but let me show you some other ones. Before I get too far into this video, most of the plants that you'll be looking at throughout this video are Bletilla striata. That is the more cold hardy form of perennial orchid. Now, of course, they're starting to cross this guy with the striata. This is Bletilla Acacia, which is hardy to zone 7, and I think that's a fair analysis because this little pocket garden is definitely a little zone 7 microclimate. You definitely can't tell based on what I've planted here that it's a little warm microclimate. But anyway, Bletilla Acacia is another beautiful type of hardy orchid, and especially the hybrids between the Bletilla striata and the Acacia are stunningly gorgeous, usually very tall. Acacia tends to flower, well, I guess it's kind of breaking its rule, but this is not a standard year. So the Acacia tends to flower later than striata and into the summer, especially if you get a good clone or a good variety of this plant. I have never had seed set on any of these plants, whether it's a hybrid or a species or a cultivar, it doesn't matter. I've never had good seed be set. So maybe that's just because the plant doesn't have its proper pollinator here, whatever that may be, but take that for what it's worth, and maybe that's nothing. I had 3 hardy orchids in this bed, this planting right here. There are other genera of orchids besides Bletilla, which are cold hardy. Some of them are even native to the United States, but I don't have any of those orchids here. Now, this is a variety called Brigantes, and it started blooming around the same time that the other ones did, but this variety actually grows to be about 40 inches tall. And you can see that the bloom stalk does continue to elongate right there, and that's how it grows. That is where you get that 40-inch tall height. These got planted in 2022. And so, just like any perennial, they're going to take a long time to get to be happy. I do have heavy clay. But one of the things that you might notice in the case with all of my orchids is that they are actually growing in full sun, or at least part sun. That one probably is shaded quite a bit by the irises, which, by the way, guys, I just have to take a quick detour to all these Japanese irises here. This is a variety, I believe, called cupcake or tiramisu, or it's a dessert name. Regardless of what sugary name it has, it is absolutely gorgeous. And it is blooming among another couple other Japanese iris varieties. There are some crocosmia mixed in. I should do these will actually be part of the garden tour, as will be the Verbena bonariensis and the Roy's repeater iris. But back to cold hardy orchids, you can see that they are growing in pretty lush, dense perennial beds. All of the perennials around them are deciduous, so they all die to the ground in the winter, with the exception of the sedum. But you can't even really seed them because the strawberries and all the other plants are growing up around them. But long story long, what I was getting at is you can see that this ground is completely smothered, or covered rather, it's not smothered, in vegetation. Primarily this bindweed here, which this stuff, I'm starting to see it flower, but one of the other, this bindweed is a major pain in the butt. You can see that this is a mild case, but they can and will use your plants as a living trellis. And I actually had to cut one of these flower stalks off on this Candles in the Wind variety because the bindweed had snapped it. So you actually do need to cut them off, or you do actually need to cut the bindweed off of the orchids. I have a dedicated pair of scissors for my garden, and I do just go in there and kind of mince this bindweed up into pieces. But I have a sense that this bindweed is part of the reason why these orchids are successful, is because the ground being so densely covered with vegetation, weeds or otherwise, you could have your favorite ground cover instead. The soil is cooler. Now it's 90 degrees today. That's even on the soil's surface. So these vines and weeds do a fantastic job of cooling the soil surface. So basically, just like a clematis, I think there's a lot of perennials that are like clematis, to where they want to have a cool root system, but they want to have their tops in sun. Now, being in Western New York, these orchids will tolerate growing in full sun. I don't know how that would work if you lived in a climate that was closer to the equator, but up here in New York, where they technically are marginally hardy, they can absolutely grow in full sun, right alongside Hedychium and Colocasia, which also are left in the ground. And that can kind of dovetail nicely into winter care. So admittedly, I don't do a whole lot for these orchids later on as the fall wanes. I don't do a whole lot for them. The one thing I am certain not to do is cut them down. As much as these scissors have to come out and cut off bindweed off their stems, I do not like to cut these down. I do not like to cut these orchids down like some people do with other perennials, because what that does basically, I'm not going to do it, but if you cut that flower stalk right here, there is cold air that is now able to penetrate into the plant. Now imagine you do that close to the ground, not a foot off the ground. Yeah, that's not a great recipe for some perennials, especially if it's maybe marginally hardy. The other thing that happens in the winter is, really in late summer, is all of this vegetation, all this bindweed tends to die off. And that will start to warm the soil as the days are shortening. And I think that probably has an effect on the plants. Another thing that you might notice is there is tons of white clover in here. This used to be lawn, and I did the sheet mulch cardboard method, and so the clover survived that, which is amazing, because clover is a great nitrogen fixer, and it's fantastic for your lawn. It's just fantastic to have around. So thanks to this wild, rampant ground cover, which is actually probably about that tall in this case, thanks to this rampant ground cover, the soil is cool even though they are in literally all day sun. So there's that. This dies off in the winter. The other thing that these weeds do, this bindweed does, is it has a taproot. And so taproots, my soil was a very heavy clay. And one of the things that this stuff has done is the taproots have drilled down, and all of this thick, crazy vegetation has decomposed over 2 years, and it has fed the soil. So in addition to my hardwood mulching, which I do in the fall, which I put down the mulch in the fall thickly over the cannas and the plants that need the extra mulch, and then in the spring I will spread out the mulch. But yeah, I don't do a ton of fertilizing out here. But again, the plants get any biomass that these plants produce throughout the summer, they get over the winter. So everything is recycled. So all of these leaves that you see, the plant gets to recycle all those nutrients right back. Actually, there's one other component that is important, or could be important, to growing hardy orchids and having them flower beautifully. This right here is a lid to a pondless waterfall vault. It's about maybe 2.5 or 3 inches tall, and it has an air vent. Now you might be wondering, what the heck does that have to do with orchids? Well, as these plants are coming out of the ground in spring, they sometimes the plants can emerge earlier than they should. And so oftentimes a lot of us deal with late frosts. And so this just goes over the plant. And then I oftentimes do weigh down the, put something on top of the hole to weigh it down. I have found that, well, being a certified aquascape contractor has certainly allowed me to have enough of these that I can use them to protect perennials in the spring. And this is actually the perfect size. This is actually about how big some of these clumps are when they're emerging. They do tend to, they're not aggressive spreaders by any means, but they do expand consistently if you let them. And I highly recommend you do. So making sure that you cover them if you get a late frost, I think definitely helps them. Granted, I haven't really not covered them and seen if they do or don't flower, but you know, covering plants that could be susceptible to late frosts is always a good idea. Another thing that I definitely want to mention in this video is planting time. I would not recommend planting these while they're dormant. So really any time in the winter or early spring, I would not recommend planting them. So let's say you're getting them from Plant Delights or some other source. God forbid it's one of those bulb places. Actually, that's, I'm gonna have a quick aside. They have what's supposed to be a hardy yellow form of Bletilla striata. It's called Penway Sunset. It's supposed to be a yellow flowering striata. Don't waste your money. They just are sending you the species form of Bletilla, which is still beautiful. I love the plant, but the fact of the matter is you're not getting what you're paying for. So Penway Sunset, at least for me, was a scam, unfortunately. But yeah, if you do get these plants as bulbs, I'm not telling you not to, because sometimes Lowe's has them available and you can get decent plants out of them. But if you do that, I would definitely recommend starting them indoors on a heat mat under grow lights, or yeah, under grow lights, because I don't know what happens exactly, but yeah, long story short, just plant them while they're growing after your risk of frost has passed. Alright y'all, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully now, if you didn't know that they existed, I don't know, drop it down below. Drop it down below. Would you plant one of these hardy orchids in your garden, or do you still think, I'm gonna shy away from it? Personally, I think these are a fantastic starting place before getting into the more native and other like hardy lady slippers and that sort of stuff, especially because of cost. Some of those lady slippers are expensive. Anyways, guys, if you want to see more content just like this, be sure to smash that subscribe button and tap the bell. And if you like this video, be sure to drop it a big ol' thumbs up. Thanks for watching.